Hello everybody, welcome to another video from www.freedqinfo.com. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the final report that is issued by NYPD, that NYPD submits to the Civil Service Commission in order for Civil Service Commission to make a decision. Now, let me back up and just basically give you a quick rundown of the process. So you get your disqualification letter, you file the notice of appeal that you're appealing it, you then sign a form releasing your medical records to some expert, then NYPD releases your psychological folder to your expert. Your expert receives the folder, he reads it over, he types up some sort of a report, and he has to submit it back to NYPD, usually within 60 days. Once NYPD receives that report from your private expert, then they in turn issue what's called a final report. This is their report that they issue after reading whatever report that your expert submitted. So let's take a look at NYPD's report, and I have 4 reports right here, and we're going to compare them. First one is Sean Patterson, next one is Victor Luna, next one is Mohammed Ahmed, and the last one is Reginald LaRouche. So let's take a look at these two basically side by side. At the very top, you notice that has the date. So for Patterson, it's 2011. For Victor Luna, it's 2010. Then it has the to and from. That's basically the same on both letters. So then, so far, the only difference, as you could see, besides the date, is, of course, the name of the applicant. So you've got Sean Patterson and Victor Luna. Next section, it says recommendation sustain original rejection. And it basically has the name of the appeal expert that each candidate hired. So that's the only difference. So you see Patterson, he hired Sal Conti, and Victor Luna, he hired John McCann. All right, and then the next section is consultant reviewing the appeal, and it's Robert Arco for Patterson. And again, for Victor Luna, it's also Robert Arco. And then there's also, of course, another appeal interview by Dale Schwartzer for Victor Luna. Then the main body of the appeal report is at the bottom. It basically says, after careful review, etc., etc. It ends with not qualified, and it's signed off by Eloise Archibald. So notice that as far as the report, I mean, this isn't any report whatsoever. It just basically says you're not qualified. Like, they got the report from the doctor, they allegedly read it, and each candidate is not qualified. So let's take a look at the next set. And again, they're exactly the same. So it just has the differences, the dates. So November 2011, this one is September 22nd, 2011. You got the name, Ahmed and LaRouche. Then the only difference, of course, is the name of the appeal expert. So here you have Michelle Alvarez, and here you have Ashraf El Sharay, and the reviewing appeal is again Arco and Arco. Both report, the body of the report basically ends with not qualified. As you can see here, I wrote not compliant with PSB, and I'll explain that in just a moment. So as you could see from these 4 documents, the only difference between all 4 of them is basically the date, all right, the name of the candidate, the name of the appeal expert that was hired by the candidate, and only in Victor Luna's case, there's an extra doctor listed by NYPD because he was interviewed a second time. But pretty much all 4 documents are exactly the same, all right? So again, the only information that changed was the date, the applicant's name and their address, and the name of the appeal expert that was hired. Now, as you could see over here, I wrote that this report is not compliant with PSB, and I wrote over here, this document is disqualified for failure to meet PSB standards, PSB 100-10, Section I. All right, so let's go take a look at the PSB so you guys understand what I'm talking about. And here is the PSB. That's the Personnel Services Bulletin that was in effect when those 4 individuals were disqualified, and the dates when those reports were issued. So I'm going to concentrate right here on this page, Section I. all right, submission to New York City Civil Service Commission, all right, and go to number 2, the cover report. This is the final report that is supposed to be submitted to the Civil Service Commission by NYPD. And notice what it says. The cover report shall contain at a minimum, A, a reference to the specific medical or psychological standard not met by the candidate. B, an explanation as to how this candidate did not meet this standard. C, how failure to meet this standard prevents the candidate from performing an essential function of the position. And lastly, D, reference to any documentation supplied by the candidate with an explanation as to why this documentation does not serve as a basis to rescind the disqualification. Oh boy, that was a lot of information there. So again, the point is, the final report is supposed to have 4 separate sections basically explaining all of these things. And note, right here it says, at a minimum, this is the minimum amount of information that the final report is supposed to have. As you can see, going back to the NYPD final reports, they don't contain any of this information. All right, that's all missing. That's why they're not compliant. Now, how can I be absolutely sure that they are not compliant? Well, let's take a look at the final report issued by another agency, which is the Department of Sanitation. Now, note, this is the final report issued by Department of Sanitation in the Bailey case. And note what I wrote here. This document is PSB compliant, specifically with Section I. And look at it, look at right here. Specific medical standard not met by the candidate. So we go over here, that's Section A, reference to the specific medical or psychological standard not met by the candidate. So they have that section and they talk about it, they explain it in detail. B, how the candidate did not meet this standard, and they talk about it. Let's go back here. B, an explanation as to how this candidate did not meet this standard. C, how the candidate's failure to meet this standard prevents the candidate from performing an essential function of the position of sanitation worker, and they talk about it. Let's compare again. C, how failure to meet this standard prevents the candidate from performing an essential function of the position. And lastly, why documentation submitted by the candidate does not serve to rescind the disqualification, and they talk about it in detail. All right, let's match it up. D, reference to any documentation supplied by the candidate with an explanation as to why this documentation does not serve as a basis to rescind the disqualification. So as you can see, the Department of Sanitation has a perfectly compliant document. Now, what is shocking is, look at the date. This is 2006. So literally 10 years ago, you have the Department of Sanitation that has a document that is perfectly compliant with the requirements of the Personnel Services Bulletin regarding, the proper disqualification of somebody. Now, why is this important or fascinating? Well, because the Department of Sanitation, they're in the business of basically garbage. I mean, that's their special. They specialize in garbage and waste removal, all right? So the fact that 10 years ago, an agency that specializes basically, again, in garbage is able to produce a perfectly compliant document totally embarrasses NYPD's documents, because NYPD's documents are completely non-compliant, and NYPD is an agency whose business is law enforcement, policies, procedures, rules, and regulations. So I want to know how an agency whose specialty is, again, rules, laws, regulations, is failing to submit documentation that is required per the Personnel Services Bulletin. And they've been doing this literally for years, most likely 30 years. So now let's talk about, okay, how long did it take NYPD to basically generate these reports? All right, this is where it gets very, very disturbing. So we look at Patterson over here, right? Now, I just told you that the only information that changed with these reports is basically the applicant's name and address and the name of his appeal doctor. There's no other information. So to basically type in Sean Patterson's name and type in the name of his appeal doctor and the date is something that'll take maybe at most 3 minutes. All right. So for each of these documents, because you can see they're pretty much identical, they're templates. So they already exist on some computer. And the only change, again, was the date and name and address of the applicant and his appeal doctor. So each of these documents could have been basically printed in about 3 minutes and mailed out to the applicant in the same day. But that's not what happened. So let's take a look at Sean Patterson's case, how long it took them to generate a document that I just explained should only take 3 minutes to do. And let's take a look. This is, again, the Excel spreadsheet. I did a separate video regarding this, but this is where it comes into play. And we're going to look right over here. Date, NYPD Final Report. Okay, that is in 2011. And as you could see here, it took them 250 days to basically write Sean Patterson's name and address on a piece of paper along with the name of his appeal doctor. With Victor Luna, it took them 228 days to basically type up the date and his name and the name of the appeal doctor. Let's take a look at Ahmed. Ahmed and who else is over here? This is Reginald Lelouch. Okay, date of NYPD Final Report, November 7th, and where is it? That's right over here. It took them 81 days to do that. And for Reginald Lelouch, it took them 92 days to do that, approximately. There's maybe a few mistakes here and there, but basically these dates are pretty much correct. So it's taken, let's see, for Sean Patterson, 250 days. For Luna, 228 days. Then for Ahmed and let's see here, Lelouch, around 80 to 90 days. Again, this is something that should have taken 3 minutes, but you know, the lowest number of days is 81 days. So why did they do this? Well, they did this because they were delaying everybody's appeals to basically eat away at the exam expiration date, because pretty much everybody's exams expired and nobody got hired. So as you can see, this is one of these built-in delays that NYPD uses in the process to basically eat away at the exam expiration date, so you could be denied your rights under civil service law and denied any opportunity and any hope of getting hired by the agency. All right, so I'm going to take a break here, and I will do more videos regarding this topic. So thank you for watching.